Members will form the quorum, and it's also the appointed time. May I call the meeting to order. Welcome to the meeting of the panel on environmental affairs. This is a policy briefing. Well, I've yet to invite you to press the request to speak button, so please cancel them all first. It's not fair, right? All right. Agenda item number 1, information papers issued since the last meeting. We have got 5. You can refer to the agenda for details. The second item, items for discussion at the next meeting. As I said, please do not press the button yet. Please don't do so before I invite you to. The second item is the items for discussion at the next meeting, which is scheduled for the 27th of November at 2:30 p.m. There are 2 suggestions from the administration: establishment of a common legislative framework for producer responsibility schemes, PRSS, and latest progress of the voluntary scheme for phasing out personal care and cosmetic products containing microbeads. All right. Item 3. Please invite the administration to join us now. We are to discuss the policy address initiatives on the environment. All right, please cancel all the buttons first. Please don't press the button. Otherwise, it will be hard for me to clear it. I will only invite you to press the button after the secretary has started to speak. Secretary. Yes. Let's listen very carefully to what the secretary is going to tell us. Cancel all the buttons, please. Don't turn the system on, otherwise they will press the button. They are so used to playing electronic games. All right. I will first invite the secretary to speak first. Secretary, over to you. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to brief members on the major policy initiatives in the policy address on carbon neutrality and waste reduction, etc. For towards carbon neutrality, we focus on energy conservation and decarbonization, green transport, and waste reduction and recycling. Now, buildings account for about 90% of our electricity consumption, and over half of our building commission is related to power generation for our buildings. So improving energy efficiency for buildings can reduce the demand for power consumption and generation. And we plan to amend the Buildings Energy Conservation Ordinance, so we will consult the organization, the sector within this year. We will require carbon audits to be done for buildings on a regular basis. Our plan is to finalize the proposals for legislative amendments as soon as possible. Now, for renewable energy, to strive to increase the share of renewable energy in the new fix for electricity generation from less than 1% at present to 7.5 to 10% by 2035, and further increase it to 15% subsequently, we will develop a large-scale floating solar system with a generating capacity of 5 megawatts at Plover Cove Reservoir. We hope to complete it in 2016, and then it will be able to supply 6 million kilowatt hours of electricity per year to be used by nearby water works facilities. To enhance capital audit work, we are going to extend to government infrastructure to cover things like freshwater pumping stations, sewage treatment works, and road lighting systems. We hope to start in Q1 24 for completion in Q3 2025. On green transport, in the first half of 2024, we will formulate a citywide green transformation roadmap and timetable for public buses and taxis so as to gradually phase out diesel buses and liquefied petroleum taxis. In the short and medium term, we will make reference to the technology and experience of the international and mainland cities leading in new energy transportation and provide support to realize our goal of introducing about 700 electric buses and about 3,000 electric taxis by end 2027. We will not overlook the need for barrier-free or transport for all. Under this concept, we are going to earmark $50 million under New Energy Transport Fund to subsidize the trade to purchase wheelchair accessible electricity taxis for the benefit of the elderly and persons with disabilities. And we intend to increase the number of private parking spaces of charging infrastructure to about 200,000 by mid-2027. And starting from this year, we are going to marketize government parks, and we will also refine land lease conditions for petrol filling stations so as to facilitate retrofitting EV charging facilities in these stations and to convert PFS in the long run. In order to attain the target of carbon neutrality by 2030, we will develop hydrogen. Hydrogen as a fuel is an important element of our decarbonization strategies. And hydrogen energy can be used in various applications such as transportation, power generation, and energy storage, and in construction sites. It is particularly relevant to the green transformation of commercial vehicles and heavy goods vehicles. We will have our strategy for hydrogen development in Hong Kong to be formulated in the next half of the first half of next year. Our plan is to introduce the amendment bill to the Council in 2025. Now, for waste reduction and recycling, in order to expedite the implementation of PRS, we plan to submit a bill to the Council to set out a common legislative framework covering different products, hopefully to expedite the implementation of the PRS. Our plan is, starting from 2025, we will implement the PRSs for 5 types of products, covering plastic beverage containers, beverage cartons, EV batteries, vehicle tires, and lead-acid batteries. The PRS on plastic beverage containers and beverage cartons will be the first PRS to be implemented under the common legislative framework. Now, on collection of food waste, last year's policy address announced the initiative to launch an 18-month trial scheme on food waste collection in PRH estates. Now, we have worked faster and more efficient, and by September this year, we're able to cover 100 blocks of PRH estates 6 months ahead of our original schedule. To complement the implementation of municipal solid waste charging in April next year, we plan to progressively expand the installation of smart recycling bins for collection of food waste in all PRH estates, involving about 1,400 additional housing blocks. The target is to do it within 2024, and the trial has been well received by residents. On natural conservation, the policy address proposed the establishment of the Sampo Shu Wetland Conservation Park in the northern metropolis to enhance the ecological quality and biodiversity of the area and to promote modernized, sustainable development of egg and fish industries. Now, in 2016, we implemented the Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan to maintain the diversity, stability, and sustainability of Hong Kong's special ecosystems. We've also got a new countryside conservation offices, new marine parks. We phased out the local ivory trade. We developed Long Valley Nature Park, and we've also rolled out the Hong Kong Biodiversity Information Hub. Based on the Kunming Montreal Global Diversity Framework, which was passed at the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, with the successful facilitation made by China, we will appropriately update Hong Kong's BSAP so that we can enjoy the beautiful ecosystem in Hong Kong and our beautiful habitats. Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. Members who would like to speak, please press the request to speak button. All right, I read out the names. All right. Ms. Chen Ming, Ms. Stephen Ho, Mr. Frankie Yik, Mr. Michael Tan, Mr. Kok Wai Keung, Ms. Chen Pui Leung, Mr. Chen Xiu Hong, Mr. Robert Lee, Mr. Andrew Lam, Mr. Tony Zi, Ms. Judy Chan, and myself. 4 minutes, including questions and answers. Do leave enough time for officials to answer your questions. Ms. Chen Yip Ming, thank you, Madam Chair. I have the following concerns on this year's policy address in this area. First, to promote the development of new energy, including raising the proportion of renewable energy in our fuel mix for power generation. Now, in the rural area, well, at the rooftops of small houses for PV panels can be installed for power generation. However, in many villages, they are subject to constraints of the power grid, and as a result, applications cannot be all approved. I hope the administration can have policy support to encourage power companies to boost the power grid capacity of rural areas so that we can enhance the infrastructure of the rural areas. On the use of e-vehicles, now the Ecology Bureau used to encourage companies to have EV facilities under a trial scheme. Now, in the rural areas, in terms of green transport and the use of e-vehicles, they can help. I suggest the administration reactivate the trial scheme for installation of EV facilities in the rural areas so that at rural community buildings and district council buildings, etc., we can have EV charging facilities to expedite decarbonization. I'm concerned about Para 7, rather, I'm concerned about the turning of waste to energy. Last year, there was a proposal to have a feasibility study for new incineration facilities. I'm concerned about the progress in Zhangzhou and another area. We are going to conduct a site visit to Zhenbeizhou and Shakuchao. I think the administration can help us to understand the progress of the incineration facilities there and see whether they can be expanded. If they can, together with the measure of reducing waste at source, then we can alleviate the pressure for the third incineration facilities. And please put on record, it is said in the policy address that everything should be industry oriented. Sandy Ridge is now zoned for INT use. This goes to show that the government has changed its mentality to catch up with the times. I think it is necessary to place the incineration facilities and away from residential areas. And I also like to ask about the expansion of the Northeast NT landfill as well. Secretary, I will invite Alan to supplement on the provision of EV charging facilities. First, on renewable energy, we'll continue to encourage buildings, not just in rural areas, to install PV panels. And if there is any problem with the power grid connectivity, we're willing to discuss with power companies. Quite a number of small houses have fitted PV panels on their roofs. We believe the growth will slow down in the future. So in future, we will focus on new areas such as large-scale PV panels and see whether we can use the facades of buildings for installation of such panels. Ms. Chen asked about whether the incineration facilities can be expanded. The one at Shakuchao is almost completed, and because of reclamation constraints, the possibility is low. For Zhangbeizhou, we will maximize the site as far as possible so that the facility can be as big as possible, so that in case we really need a third facility, it need not be of such a big scale. Ms. Chen is concerned about the development of the Northern Metropolis. We have INT users there, and there is also the cross-boundary control point. But you have to note that there are such facilities in Qianhai as well. Modern incineration facilities will not generate adverse impacts, and they can be totally compatible with modernized development of the city. For EV charging facilities in rural areas, I defer to my colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Chen. Sorry, Ms. Chen, for your question. The government will make sure there are adequate charging facilities to tie in with the increase in the number of electric vehicles. For private residential developments, by 2027, we'll have over 200,000 parking spaces with charging infrastructure. For the facilities needed by rural areas, as Ms. Chen said, we have been liaising with power companies. We want to make sure the scheme is continuously implemented, or if they have other innovative schemes that can help the rural area. I want to also say that it was mentioned in the policy address we have existing 180 petrol filling stations, PFSs, and in the meeting held in July, we said that we'll refine the land lease conditions to encourage PFSs to retrofit EV charging facilities to charge electric vehicles or electric commercial vehicles. Next, Mr. Stephen Ho. Thank you, Chair. I want to ask about 154 about dual carbon targets. And then it was said that Shanpo-Shu Wetland Conservation Park would be established. So the agriculture and fisheries industries have some concerns because I think the government is not very effective in maintaining biodiversity. Every year, at the end of the year, we have migratory birds. However, in Maipo, the migratory birds have killed local creatures. They also killed some fish breeds. So if you are saying that you're trying to introduce modern aquaculture, we do not have adequate legislation in place. People may want to construct houses, but we can't even put an electric box there. So will you review the legislation for that? Now, the report, the spirit of the 20th National Congress, said that the harmony between humans and animals have to be maintained. So we are not trying to go back to 5,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago or 100 years ago. It's more about maintaining the harmony. You shouldn't drive away the people who were already there. You need to promote integration instead. Right now, people are being very extreme about environmental friendliness. People would say you can't do any development, the area should just be closed off. But that is not the way to go. We need to remain reasonable and strike a balance. So with the management of Shanpo-Chu, how will you help the stakeholders to continue to develop their businesses or lives there? Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Ho, for your comments. I'll let Mr. Wu talk about specifically what to do with Shanpo-Shu in future. But of course, we need to change our conservation approach. We need to strike a balance between development as well as conservation. While we are trying to conserve, we want to make sure the agriculture and fisheries industries can continue to develop. We have different uses with our land, and we do want to allow both to develop, both the nature and the industries. I'll let the director talk about the specifics. Thank you. Thank you. In relation to the planning and management of Shanpo-Shu Wetland Conservation Park, we have all along been liaising with stakeholder groups, including those in the fisheries industry. Our initial plan is to have the Shanposhi Park, especially the ecologically sensitive areas. We will conduct wetland conservation as well as aquaculture there. So for these areas, we can use them as ecological fish ponds. So fishermen can practice aquaculture in such sites in future. They can conduct management, conservation, as well as aquaculture in these ecologically sensitive areas. For certain areas, we'll have some high value added aquaculture areas. We'll have high intensity aquaculture there. Fishermen can choose which way to go in future. That is just the foundation. In future, the specifics, which areas to be used for which, we'll think about that. Well, I hope that the administration can convey my comments to their colleagues, because these are dealt with by different departments. If you do not have a regional or district regulatory authority to deal with that, that will not happen. So please think about it and please convey my comments. Next, Mr. Frankie Yik, I have 5 questions. It was said that at the Plover Cove Reservoir, there will be a large-scale floating solar system. It was also said the fuel mix will be increased from less than 1% to 7.5 to 10%. Well, what other measures will you have to make sure this target is achieved? In paragraph 5, it was said that a roadmap for green transformation for buses and taxis will be formulated. Now, we all know that the costs have increased by a lot recently. So I want to know, will the government provide subsidies to the relevant stakeholders to purchase the vehicles? I then want to talk about car parks. I understand that some car parks are allowed to install EV-ready facilities, and they will get an exemption with the gross floor area. But with the 78,000 related parking spaces that have already approved, what are they exactly? Also, it is said that the stakeholders will be subsidized for purchasing wheelchair-accessible electric taxis. But I want to say that drivers won't want to take wheelchair persons during peak hours. They'd rather drive other passengers that take up less of their time. So you need to have measures to help the disabled wheelchair persons who are grassroots. Regarding the producer responsibility schemes, PRSs, it is said that it would regulate 5 products. Will you implement charging for the 5 products? Thank you. The administration, please be brief on this. In relation to the subsidies provided for the purchase of vehicles, parking spaces, and EVs, I'll let Mr. Alan Lowe talk about that. As for the floating solar system and regarding renewable energy, indeed, the 7.5 to 10% is an ambitious target. With transformation already in place, we have yet to reach 2%. We do want to install large-scale solar PV panels on facades to help make that happen. And from the experience on the mainland, we believe they would be more effective than those installed on rooftops. With those in place, we believe we can achieve the 7.5 to 10% target. Ellen, you can answer the rest. Thank you. In relation to e-taxis, I can give some supplementary information. Mr. Yik asked about whether there are any subsidies to be provided. I would like to raise a few points. One is that there are always technological advances and the market evolves very quickly. From actual data, we can see that the vehicle prices, whether it's large or small electric vehicles, in recent years there have been many changes with that. And regarding the operating costs, of course, the vehicle price would take up part of the operation costs, but from previous data, the long-term operating costs, including the maintenance costs, EVs will be more competitive compared to traditional vehicles. So the new energy transport fund will help in the sense that whether it's bus operators or minibus operators, they will be provided assistance to test out electric vehicles in Hong Kong. And the relevant departments have all along been liaising with the industry stakeholders. We will make use of the data collected in the pilot projects to see how things are, whether it's electric buses or e-taxis, whether there is any need to provide subsidies and how much we should subsidize. We will definitely look into that. In relation to the number of parking spaces, we have provided exemption for a gross floor area. As said, the government has approved more than 78,000 related parking spaces with basic charging facilities, and 30,000 of them have been completed. They are located in the new residential developments for their residents' use. It is also said that $50 million have been earmarked under the new Energy Transport Fund to subsidize the trade to purchase wheelchair-accessible electric taxis. We have been liaising with the industry to make sure that the $50 million are used properly. Well, in relation to the 5 products to be regulated under PRSs, are they planning to charge industry stakeholders for the products regulated as well? Well, the microphone isn't turned on. Well, I think the spirit is that with retailers or producers or consumers, they all have responsibility in that. For a scheme operated by the government, of course, the government would charge, and then they will have some recyclers recycle the products. If the schemes are to be market operated, then the operators will be charging costs. But of course, that's their decision. The stakeholders would have to work it out among themselves. So they would have to think about that. I think Mr. Yik is just asking whether you are planning to charge people for the regulation of such products. Well, as I said earlier, if the scheme is to be operated by the government, we will charge producers for that. Well, so one must pay, is that right? Well, I think we should put it this way. In future, the PRSs will be market operated. However, when liaising with industry stakeholders, some stakeholders are quite concerned about how they are going to implement such arrangements. So I think depending on the type of product, we'll decide on the approach to take. So for the 5 types of products, are they under the scheme? Yes. Well, the 5 types of products are under the PRSs, but whether it is to be they are to be operated by the government or the market, it will depend on what is going to happen in future. Thank you. Mr. Michael Tian, please.
Secretary, in para 86 of the policy address, let's said that there will be resources to achieve the target of having 7,000 electric buses and 3,000 electric taxis by end 2027. It was first proposed in last year's policy address. I'd like to know the progress. According to information I've got, as at September, we've only got 58 buses using new energy. That was in 2022. 1 year has elapsed. So what is the figure now? Last year, we visited the first electric double-decker bus in Hong Kong. Now, the operating cost was double that of diesel buses, and the battery is heavy. 3 hours of charging will allow the bus to run for 200 kilometers. So the bus can only be deployed to short journeys. For a 12-meter e-buses, it can only offer 113 seats, 24 less than a conventional bus. So this is quite troublesome. The operating cost is higher, revenue lower. So I don't know how they will work out the cost. I think passengers are not willing to pay higher fares for riding on an e-bus. So in the long run, what is the economics of electric buses? What will be the model like? Can the government subsidize the gap in bus fares to make e-buses viable? Until when? In the long run, they are not sustainable. For new energy, you can only turn to hydrogen energy. The industry thinks that commercial vehicles can only be for light or duty vehicles. The industry feels that hydrogen is the best solution to heavy-duty commercial vehicles, but you only start the study next year. Do you really think that hydrogen is the solution to heavy-duty commercial vehicles? Now, for e-buses, what if they cannot be viable because of the increase in operating costs? Secretary, I'll invite my colleague to supplement on the progress of e-vehicles. Mr. Tian raised a question. The industry would like to know what will be the mainstream technology in in commercial buses. Will it be hydrogen or electricity? That's why we are going to conduct a study. We will work it out together with the transport and logistics industry to find out the resources required to for smooth implementation of e-buses without causing undue burden on the traveling public. Would that include subsidies for bus fares? No, that is not included. Hydrogen buses and electric buses have their upsides and downsides. For the former, the downside is one full charge cannot travel as long as a hydrogen bus. For the latter, perhaps refilling hydrogen once a day will do, but for electric buses, maybe recharging twice a day. And in fact, for new e-buses, the battery doesn't take up as much space. The problem is hydrogen is much more expensive than electricity. E-buses are then cheaper in terms of operating cost, and the maintenance is also simpler. Bus depots will have to provide more EV charging facilities. That is usually done for buses over the night and daytime. Those charging facilities can be open to the public for extra revenue. So which is the best approach? It will be for the bus companies to work out. Right now, both technologies will have assistance from us. But bus companies are entirely with us when it comes to the use of new energy. Without hydrogen bus yet, the buses have a smaller capacity. That means a lower income from fares. Will the government subsidize their income? New e-cars have smaller battery and there is more room for seats, and the maintenance cost is lower than that of diesel buses. Besides, electricity is a cheaper fuel. So our concern, however, is the capital cost for the transformation. What about the existing buses? If they are to transform to e-buses, will you have to cut the seats substantially? For the new models, it seems that the extent of seats cut is not as like the previous buses. And besides, the maintenance cost is lower. But let's not dwell into the technicalities. I think we really have to be strict with the time because we have 16 members waiting to ask questions. Mr. Kwok Wai-keung, thank you. FTU is concerned about the fluctuation in fuel prices on power tariff. FTU, during the public consultation of the PA, asked the administration to introduce beneficial competition of power supply and increase the percentage of imported carbon zero power from the mainland. But we do not have any substantive proposals in the paper. I'd like to know whether our suggestion is being considered or are you doing some studies? I'm pleased that by 2035 we may be able to increase the share of renewable energy in the fuel mix to 7.5 to 10%. We're just told that building facades might be used for renewable energy. My query is whether that can really be easily done for old buildings. If you want subsequently to attain the target of 15% in terms of fuel mix, will you give us a roadmap? Tell us the options and the cost effectiveness of each option to allow the public to have a say. The policy address said that for a collection of food waste, that will be expanded from some PRH estates to all in Hong Kong. This is worthy of our support. But then Mr. Michael Look has a suggestion here. Now, in Tian Hang Estate, they have smart recycling bins for food waste. But in another housing estate, Fu Tai, there is no such smart bins. Mr. Michael Look is of the view that it is really a way of public education and publicity. If it is not that expensive, perhaps you should not be too miserly with the cost. Can all new PRH estates have this kind of food waste bins so that households can then dump food waste into the bins that can enhance participation rate and also recycling rate? Secretary, food waste and renewable energy, can I defer to the Permanent Secretary for details? Carbon zero energy, we've got a plan which we have briefed the panel on previously. But then the details have yet to be ironed out. We're discussing with companies in the mainland, so that's why we have not included this point in the policy address. The point is we will for sure import more carbon zero energy from the mainland. P.S. We understand that the bins are quite well received by residents. But some say, but some have some reservations. So we encourage the households to register with us first. If they've registered with us, we will distribute the bins to them. So we will review the situation. We will see whether other supporting measures can be put in place to support food waste recycling. Mr. Champuyin, my question is about the taxis as well. It is said that by entering 2027, we should have introduced about 3,000 electric taxis, accounting for about 15 to 16% of the total taxi fleet in Hong Kong. I'd like to know whether you are on the conservative side. Can you expedite the introduction of electric taxis? And I tend to agree with Mr. Frankie Yik. We should provide incentives for the taxi trade to transform their taxis, targeting at those aged over 15 years in particular. When it comes to the 50 million fund for wheelchair accessible electric taxis, I'd like to know the number of taxis you can subsidize using this amount of money. Will you set a target, for instance, with $50 million, you can at least help 30% of our taxis to be wheelchair accessible electrical ones? Last question about food waste collection services. The household food waste account for 70% of the total amount. The PRH estates have got the smart bins, but it's just for collection, not really for processing. The food has to be transported to Siu Ho Wan, to your facility, before they can be processed. Can we have improved recycling bins so that food waste can be turned to compost on site that can reduce carbon emission by means of transporting to Siu Ho Wan? Secretary Edding will comment on the wheelchair accessible electric taxis. We are using smart recycling bins for collecting food waste. It can control odor and can reduce moisture or water in the food waste. We're also developing larger processors, probably not for household use, but to be placed at shopping malls or hotels. There can be some pre-processing there. The food waste can be ground or blended to become a puree, so that there won't be any odor emission during transportation. That can also greatly reduce transportation costs. Whether there can be on-site processing, technically speaking, that is possible. But then we would need much more space. And there will still be residue left after processing, and transportation is still needed. And if we collect such from different spots, the cost is going to be high. So we will have smart recycling bins, and at a spacious area we will have larger recycling bins so that it is clean, convenient, and also affordable. Taxis, I will defer to my colleague. I will provide supplementary information on electric taxis. We have about 80,000 odd electric taxis in Hong Kong. Our target is by end 2017 we will have 3,000 electric bin taxis. People ask whether we can expedite the process. We are confident that we can meet the target of 3,000. To expedite the switch, it will be challenging. We need EV charging facilities, and another important point is supply. In the market, it's true that there is electric taxis available, but According to our understanding, from placing of order to delivery, it takes almost a year. And it is noted that in the market, there are newer models coming into the market. We should allow time for the industry to choose the model of electric taxis they like. This is a more practical way.
提到啦，關於個
It was also said earlier that the $50 million earmarked for the subsidizing of the purchase of wheelchair accessible e-taxis. We think we need more studies done before we can implement any changes. Right now, for the 18,000 taxis, 4,000 of them can be retrofitted with wheelchair accessible facilities. But why do we not see such wheelchair accessible taxis that often? It is because it would require the driver to remove some seats or other structures in the taxis to fit the wheelchair accessible facilities. It would take time to do so, of course, so drivers are unwilling to have such facilities fitted, and also it will take longer to have wheelchair persons get into taxis. So as said earlier, drivers are not as willing to be wheelchair accessible taxis, especially during peak hours. The cost is also definitely higher. So when we are trying to ensure efficient allocation of the $50 million, we believe more studies need to be done. We'll liaise with the industry to listen to their comments. We will liaise with the Labor and Welfare Bureau. Once we have any updates, we will liaise with the industry on that. Well, I don't know how long it's going to take. Next, Mr. Chan Soo-hung, please. The speaker's microphone is not turned on. The speaker's microphone is not turned on. The speaker's microphone is not turned on. Well, I'm very happy that the government will have a strategy of hydrogen development for Hong Kong for the relevant application of hydrogen. I can see that the secretary will be responsible for that. I think the secretary is very passionate about it. 10-odd hydrogen projects have already been vetted before this framework is already in place. But I am worried that perspective that the secretary is going to take, because the perspective that the secretary is going to take is likely only from a green perspective. You can't see the whole picture of the development of the whole hydrogen industry. I suggested to the chief executive that the government should complement with the development of the GBA, with the development of the hydrogen industry. The government should tie in with the development of the loop and Shantung Technopole to promote the industrialization of hydrogen application. So, Secretary, is it the case that the chief executive or the financial secretary thinks it is not right to have the whole supply chain of hydrogen development? If that is the case, I will help make that happen. I'll talk to the chief executive and the financial secretary again. Also, it is said that a bill on hydrogen will only be introduced in 2025. If hydrogen enterprises want to move into Shantung Technopole, if you don't have the policies in place, won't they be discouraged? Also, in the legislation, it is said that hydrogen vehicles cannot travel in tunnels. From what I heard, the Transport Department is researching the potential hazards associated with that. I want to ask if there is any schedule when that would be completed. Thank you. Secretary. Well, I want to say that the current term government is very committed to promoting the development of green industries. But of course, there are many factors involved. That's why they are not mentioned specifically in the policy address, because these measures are still in the planning stage. We may consider local development as well as those of the mainland and overseas cities. So I want to say that the chief executive and the financial secretary are very supportive of the development of hydrogen industry in Hong Kong. Well, you asked if it would be too slow if we only introduce a bill in 2025. But you can see that we already have some ideas floating about in relation to hydrogen fueling stations or certain schemes that encourage the use of hydrogen. We actually have an interdepartmental working group on the hydrogen use as a fuel. So we are already working on that. We believe in the next 1 or 2 years, once we have some data, we would transfer that experience into the drafting of the bill. Also, when we set some standards, we may need to make adjustments when we draw reference from international or mainland standards for application in Hong Kong. But that is definitely not going to impede with our application of hydrogen in Hong Kong. Well, in relation to the vehicles not being able to travel in tunnels, well, as you said, the department is working on a study, and that study will be completed next year. We will have a clear stance by then. From what we saw on the mainland, at least my opinion is that with reference to safety standards and working practices, we should be able to make it happen. But I can only say for sure after the study is completed. Next, Mr. Robert Lee. Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank the government for promoting the use of EVs, including the first registration tax concession, as well as measures to promote the installation of EV charging facilities. I can see from the paper that EVs, the percentage of electric private cars among all newly registered private cars had soared from 6.3% in 2019 to 64.3% in the first 8 months of this year. So I would like to ask the administration if they would consider importing more electric cars of other brands, especially mainland brands, because there is vibrant development of EVs in Hong Kong. Would you also consider importing 7-seater electric vehicles, for example? Also, I can see that smart recycling bins will be installed at all PRH estates. In order to increase the quantity of food waste to be recycled, will you roll out such smart recycling bins to private residential developments or commercial buildings? Thank you. Secretary, please. In relation to EVs, you can see that we have a 1-for-1 scheme, and we also have some schemes to promote the installation of EV charging facilities. you can see, as said earlier, there has been a significant increase of electric private cars in Hong Kong. We can see that the percentage of electric private cars among all newly registered private cars will continue to increase. And many makers are very eager to sell their electric private cars in Hong Kong. As you can see that in the past year. And we can see that electric cars are very advanced in the mainland, and they have now been expanding to many parts of the world. And if they're ready, they will come to Hong Kong as well. In relation to food waste, the smart recycling bins are still at a pilot test stage. So in the 18 months we tested that at the 100 blocks, and as said earlier, we were 6 months ahead of schedule. And we could see that, as I said earlier, that the residents have positive feedback about the smart recycling bins. We hope to roll those out to all public housing estates. In relation to private residential developments or commercial buildings, shopping malls or hotels, we will have some large-scale food waste system. We have that in English called something like Transmart systems. Because these are large-scale systems, they are suitable for use in large facilities. For private housing estates, they have their own management companies or owners corporations. We will have the recycling fund as well as the environmentally friendly fund to subsidize them in installing similar facilities. We believe it's right for them to take their own responsibility in that. Thank you. Next, Mr. Andrew Lam. I have 2 questions. In relation to the emergency response system in response to extreme weather, I am very happy to see something in relation to that mentioned in the policy address. I can see that studies will be done, and what is the direction that you're going to take in your studies? Do you have any concrete schedule? I want to ask, in the development infrastructure in new development areas, will such features be incorporated? In relation to recycling and food waste recycling in particular, from what I heard, there is a pilot scheme, and of course I think that is beneficial. But for waste recycling, I can see that the government is just taking it step by step. I don't see any comprehensive planning in place. I can see that there are systems or measures implemented for some larger housing estates, but how can you make sure something similar will be implemented in 3 new buildings as well? Also, it was said earlier that 5 products will be included in the regulation in 2025, but I don't hear anything about styrofoam boxes. Will you have any regulation for styrofoam boxes? Thank you. Secretary, in relation to food waste and other kinds of products to be regulated, I'll let the permanent secretary talk about that. In relation to the measures in response to extreme weather, I'll talk about what the observatory is going to implement. They will first look at the technologies that they use in forecasting to see if they can adopt some more advanced technologies or models in prediction we also want to see if we can enhance the accuracy in prediction so that we can disseminate information quicker. That's one. And they are also conducting studies to see if they can make use of weather prediction and big data to, of course, forecast weather, but also perhaps when it gets to a certain level of rain, if they can predict flooding possibilities. And then we can conduct preparations in advance. We'll conduct studies into that. We'll work together with the observatory will work together with the Environmental Protection Department on that. The preliminary findings will be ready in the next year, and we believe we can have some pilot projects conducted in the next rain season or before the next rain season. Thank you.
P.S. Thank you, Mr. Lam, for your question. On the question of food waste, as said by the Secretary, large producers of food waste are hotels and shopping malls. We are very proactively promoting the recycling bins to them. We want to centralize the processing of food waste, and in some government facilities, we have already put in place on-site processing of food waste. At wholesale markets and FEHD markets and cooked food centers will gradually be able to process food waste on site. If the model proves successful, it will be promoted. For treatment of municipal solid waste, now we have the PRS and also waste charging scheme. They are all part of our comprehensive blueprint to address waste. When it comes to styrofoam box, it is not covered under the PRS because we've yet to find an effective alternative for styrofoam box. In transportation of fresh fruit produce, in like vegetables, styrofoam boxes are still useful. Mr. Tony Jie, thank you. There are a few points I'd like to follow up on in the paper. The first is para 2. Proposed amendments to the Buildings Energy Efficiency Ordinance. It is said here that the interval of energy audit may be reduced from 5 years to 10 years. Can you tell us the number of buildings you intend to tackle after you need manpower? And will there be indicators? For instance, do you have any target when it comes to the reduction in carbon emission? Another question is about para 6. You have 2 sites in Kowloon East and NT East, respectively, where you will invite tenders for conversion of the 2 PFS sites. Have you considered the financial viability? According to the administration, the government will marketize the free charging services. You want the fees to be attractive enough, but you also have to consider the financial viability. For instance, how many EVs can you handle in an hour on average? And do you have any smart information for users so they don't have to wait at PFS? because that can cause traffic problems. Annex 1, the first point, is to regulate the proper disposal of food waste, and you will require residential units, residential developments with more than 100 units to be fitted with such facilities. The problem is in some residential buildings, they don't have room to store. And the green and community network is good. The point is, many people do not know that there are such network or stations near their homes. Can you publicize the recycling network, green and community, to the neighborhood? And for some stations, they will only collect recyclables once a week. You have to publicize this again. Otherwise, people will ask, how come we have to pay for municipal solid waste charge, and yet those green stations are not working? On energy efficiency, I will invite the EMSD to elaborate. Tendering exercise for the PFS sites, we have the view that it is viable. There is nothing to worry about. Many companies already contacted us on details. They are all interested because the cost for electricity and diesel are very different. So we're not worried. On regulation and control of recyclables, you can see that recycling bins are quite commonly found in residential developments, but in private residential developments, sometimes for expedience sake, the contractor, the cleansing contractor, may just dump it with other waste to the landfill. So we will work on this, and for places that don't have room to do as required under our plan, we will see how we can help. We can ask the recycling stores to help. For recycling stores, they are growing quickly. We have over 0.3 million users registered, and the membership is still growing. We will continue to publicize this network. I believe as soon as we have introduced the municipal solid waste charging, people will ask where these community network of recycling stores are. But we will publicize. Energy efficiency, can I invite EMSD to briefly elaborate? EMSD, thank you. Thank you. The building's energy efficiency ordinance will require specified types of buildings to conduct an energy audit once every 10 years. In the US, South Korea, Japan, Beijing, and Singapore, the average interval is about 5 years. We believe 5 years is an appropriate interval because technology develops rapidly. In the interest of time, can they tell us whether they have indicators for waste reduction? Thank you. For a building's energy efficiency, according to our experience, after each energy audit, it takes about 1.5 to 3 to 5 years to recover the cost for the audit. And electricity consumption can be cut in between by about 2 to 8%. So if the audit is done every 5 years, we'll be able to cut at least 10% of the power consumption. As for the number of buildings that will be covered. We believe about 6,000 buildings will be included. In Hong Kong, we have 1,100 approved auditors for energy audit. With this amount of manpower resources, we believe the additional buildings can be handled by the 1,100 auditors. We welcome that because of the carbon neutrality target, we need more carbon audits. So you do not have any hard targets for cutting or power reduction. What about the two PFS sites? On average, how many EV can be handled per hour? They usually have ultra-fast charging facilities at these PFS sites. So we believe one will be able to cope with 3 EVs per hour. When a PFS site is turned to an EV charging site, it will have at least 8 such charging facilities. And we also encourage existing PFS to install EV charging facilities. We will have terms in the land lease to encourage the retrofitting of some EV charging facilities. So there will be a certain number of EV charging facilities in PFS in the future. Thank you, Ms. Judy Chen. Thank you, Chair. I want to thank the Secretary and his team for devoting their energy to environmental protection. My concern is about EVs. I'm pleased to see that the CE plans to provide about 200,000 private parking spaces with charging infrastructure. I'd like to know how that can be done. In October, we had a paper from the administration in 2027 and 28 after the EV charging at home subsidy scheme. There will be 140,000, and in 3 years' time, another 7,000 parking spaces in government buildings will also be provided. So I'd like to know. I want to have a breakdown of the 200,000 spaces to be provided. I just mentioned the EV charging at home subsidy scheme. I know the government has spent $3.5 billion on this scheme so that more parking spaces with EV facilities can be provided in PRHs. This plus the one-for-one replacement scheme are very popular. I know that we have to be careful with the use of public funds, but I'd like to know whether the scheme can be extended. Some members asked whether we can have more mainland produced EVs as an option. Apart from changing the left-hand drive to right-hand drive, I'd like to know whether the standards will have to be changed from national standards to European standards. Because this is done, then it will be very troublesome for local motorists to drive to the mainland and charge their vehicles. So can you remove some of the restrictions? Another question is on the buildings. Members mentioned buildings energy efficient. I'm of the view that with lesser decoration, we can reduce a lot of carbon emission. You have got cooperation scheme with the Hong Kong Housing Authority. Every time a unit is returned to the housing authority, the decoration has to be removed. The flat has to be restored to its original condition. Can I ask the HA to check with the next tenant? And if the decoration is acceptable, perhaps you don't have to remove it. That will save carbon emission.
Secretary, please. Well, I'll see if the permanent secretary can give any supplementary information in relation to buildings. We know that we now have 6,000 public and private charging facilities. As said earlier, from 2011, if buildings want to have gross floor area exemption, they must have basic charging facilities in place. And right now there are 78,000 parking spaces, and right now 3,000 of them have already been completed. We also have the EV charging at home subsidy scheme. We believe 140,000 parking spaces of residential buildings are covered under the scheme, and as you said earlier, an additional 7,000 parking spaces will be built. As said earlier, because the scheme in 2011, we have approved more than 78,000 and only 3,000 are completed, and we plan to marketize the free charging services in the government. And many private operators are very interested. We think, according to our estimates, in the current term government, we already have 10,000 or at least 20,000 additional parking spaces. So that would definitely be over 200,000 altogether. It was asked earlier whether the EHSS will be extended. We are already in the second phase, as a matter of fact, and more than half of the residential car parks have already installed such facilities. So we will not continue with the scheme. If they're interested, they can implement their own arrangements. I'll let Ms. Chen talk about the rest in relation to public housing. Yes, we will continue to liaise with the housing authority. In relation to the fitting out works, we did talk about that, but the housing authority would have other factors to consider. For example, the turnover. They want to make sure the process is streamlined. But we will definitely explore the possibility with the housing authority. Thank you. Next, Ms. Carmen Khan. Well, I first want to ask about the coordination between government departments. I can see that paragraph 82 said that the government will review the columbaria planning in Sandy Ridge because there are adequate number of niches. Sandy Ridge has now been used for INT. I do appreciate this change because it ties in with the development of Shenzhen, and I can see that we have to have integrated plans with the Greater Bay Area, including some infrastructure support. Well, while I do welcome the change in policy, but I can see that in page 7, it says that in the northern metropolis, they will identify a site for a waste-to-energy facility. So when formulating policy measures, did the administration conduct studies into the proposals, and will there be any flexibility in their design or choices for site location of facilities? I can see that the waste to energy facility will be something akin to IPARC. Can the administration elaborate on when they are formulating policies? Will they have a comprehensive planning? I don't want to see what is happening in paragraph 82 to happen again. That is, we are changing the use of the area. And in relation to the renewable energy in paragraph 3, it is said that the government is striving to increase the share of renewable energy in the fuel mix. That is, of course, beneficial. But is it the case that the government will be doing everything on their own? Because it is said that in paragraph 3, we will develop a large-scale floating solar system and so on. Because it is to be used for direct use by the nearby waterworks facilities, and it is a solar system. Will the two power companies be in the picture? And if they are indeed in the picture, will they transfer the cost to the public? We would also have to think about that when we are thinking much to subsidize power companies. We also have to think about how we can tie in with the power generation in the mainland for that. So would the administration please elaborate on that? Thank you. In relation to the coordination of policies, I don't think that means that there shouldn't be any changes in policy. Of course, Sandy Rich proposal should be discussed at the panel on food safety and environmental hygiene instead. But I can say this right now, that when we formulate policies, we'll definitely see what is in the best interests of the citizens of Hong Kong, and then we may change our policy. It doesn't mean that we have inconsistencies in our policy direction. It's just that we want to keep pace with the times and act in the best interests of the public, and that is what we are doing. You also asked about what we're going to do in future in relation to waste processing. Our direction is clear. We will stop using the landfills to store waste. Our target is to have that happen before 2035. We of course want to expedite that. Before I was secretary, I already advocated for the suspension of the northeastern landfill by 2032. We are definitely working on that by having more incinerating facilities. We are also coming up with new ways to deal with domestic waste. In that case, we may not need a third incinerator in Northern Metropolis, but before we have other proposals, we believe we need to have that plan in the pipeline. We are talking to the Development Bureau. We want to reserve a site for a potential third incinerating facility, but this is not fixed. We, of course, want to have something else instead, but that is still in the pipeline, so I won't go into details. Now, we are saying that we want to increase the share of renewable energy in the fuel mix. Of course, we do not exclude the possibility of working with the two power companies on this, but we want to make sure the electricity costs will be low for the public. If the two power companies are to take part, the electricity fees may be increased, and that's not what we want to see. That's why we are installing the large-scale floating solar system at the reservoir or some other large sites. We are also encouraging the installation of solar PV panels on new territories, exempted houses, and TEHs. So we have these other schemes in place. That's why our priority is not to work with power companies, but we're not excluding the possibility at the moment. Thank you. Next, Mr. Lau Kwok Fan, Professor Lau Kwok Fan. Well, I can see that in the policy address there are many initiatives proposed by the EEB, and I do appreciate the change in the proposal for the Sandy Ridge. I believe that should facilitate the comprehensive planning of Northern Metropolis. I want to ask about the Shamposhi Wetland Conservation Park specifically. Well, I think the Secretary and I think alike, because I think that we can strike a balance between conservation and development, and I believe there should be rezoning of wetland. And while I do see the government agreeing to rezone certain wetland. However, I can see that in Northern Metropolis, 300 hectares of land have been rezoned as wetland. Well, would you consider defining the boundaries of the wetland sites or buffering areas? That's my first question. In relation to wetland conservation, did the government calculate how much area will be involved in the resumption of land and how much cost would be involved? Would you adopt the same approach for country parks, in that you don't have to resume land, you are just imposing restrictions for the area to be used as a wetland park, and then you can provide some policy support to the stakeholders to have to conserve the land while conducting economic activities in the area. I can see a potentially high cost being involved here, so I want to ask, will you redefine the boundaries for wetlands, and how will you manage the park, or how will you operate the park? Thank you, Professor Lau. Excuse me, Mr. Lau. I can see that you understand that the government is adopting a proactive approach to rehabilitate damaged land and conduct conservation in the area. So it's not just about closing off an area. So we are thinking how to enhance the biodiversity within that plot of land, instead of concerning ourselves about the size of the land. The AFCD will implement a wetland park system in the northern portion of the Northern Metropolis, and a study is being conducted. The study is expected to be completed next year. We will then have a more detailed strategy. We expect that the wetland conservation area and the buffering area's boundaries will have to be redefined. I think that is naturally the case. While we do want development to happen, when we adopt a proactive approach, we do want to make sure we strike a balance. You asked earlier whether the government will consider other ways for the resumption of land. We're conducting studies. I can't say the details for now, but we will consider different approaches to conserve the wetland. We will consider perhaps adopting a public-private partnership model. We want to not use a lot of public money in the management of the park. Well, I would like to thank the secretary for telling us that you are conducting studies, but I can see that you already have a direction in mind. So I would like to express my support, and I hope that you will get the support of the industries as well. Thank you.
Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. Thank you, Madam Chair. Recently, on many measures taken by the administration to help people's livelihood and the economy, I think they have acted too slowly. They know you knew the solutions already. It's just that you were too slow in implementation. The measures are long overdue. When it comes to municipal solid waste, I think the direction is clear. On the one hand, we want to cut waste at source, and secondly is to turn waste into energy. And this is also the approach we adopt in Hong Kong. We've already got some facilities, but some have yet to be completed. Recently, we were taken to Shenzhen for a visit. We understood that Shenzhen were able to tackle 18,000 tons of waste. They no longer rely on landfills anymore. They do it by incineration. And we visited the GBA area. It's very common for their public buses to run with EVs. And their EV charging capacity is up to 1 second per kilometers already. So we are too far backward. Many car owners in Hong Kong claim that there is limited EV charging facilities. Minibuses and taxis, no matter how much they want to use e-vehicles, they can't. In Shenzhen, they even have PV panels on their building facade, and that can greatly reduce their reliance on electricity. They also have renewable energy. The EEB announced some new measures in the policy address. Of course, I welcome them. It's just that we are too slow compared to what the other cities in the GBA are doing. That was what we observed during our visit. So how come we already knew the way out, and yet we were not acting accordingly? Thank you, Secretary. I thank you for your persistence and your concern for the environment. You mentioned a few subjects. They are just as close to our hearts. In the PA, we have got not just the main directions, but targets as well. We require the department or the bureau to achieve these indicators within this term of government. Now we are going to have 700 electric buses and 3,000 electric taxis, and we have to work with the transport industry on the kind of support they need from the government to help them to achieve these targets. And on waste management, you see we're going to launch the municipal solid waste charging scheme, And for the construction of incinerators, we will expedite our works. We have exchanged views with the experienced companies that build incinerators in the mainland. We have consulted them on how we can expedite our works so that in the design and tendering process, we can expedite our works. I believe early next year we will come back to the council to give an account of our plans for building the incinerators. I look forward to your support as well as suggestions so we can be more efficient. I'm sure this is our common goal. Thank you. There are many solutions for protecting the environment are very clear to us. The question is, we are too slow. If you ask for funding support from the government, from us, I'm sure we will give you our support. We really have to race with time. Thank you. Mr. Kenneth Lau, thank you. In the 15th or the 14th five-year plan, and the country gave full support to green living and to enhance the community's awareness of protecting the environment and the use of new energy. And as presidency, no matter wealth is no match to our natural scenery. And we have also got our carbon neutrality targets, and our targets are in alignment with the national targets. As for the implementation of policies, my questions are about EVs and also development of new energy. We have seen a 40% increase in the number of registered e-vehicles in Hong Kong compared with 2018, and the administration intends to provide another 20,000 private parking spaces with charging infrastructure. But that means we will have higher power consumption. In Hong Kong, we are going to develop I&T, and all these activities need electricity. We rely on fossil fuels for power generation now. Assuming that we have a rising demand for electricity in the future, does that mean that we are going to use more fossil fuel, or are we going to cooperate with the mainland so that we can have the same power source shared by two cities? Thank you. We have got very clear targets for the fuel mix. We have already decided that by 2035, we will stop the use of fossil fuel. Coal accounts for about 1/4 of our power generation. By 2035, I expect that 1/4 of our power will come from Daya Bay nuclear power plant, and the rest are from liquid natural gas. Another target is by 2035, the overall carbon emission in Hong Kong should be cut by half. To achieve this target, just switching from coal to natural gas for power generation is not good enough. So we will work with the mainland for importation of more carbon zero power. We have asked CLP to increase its power transportation capacity through its network from Daya Bay. We ask it to boost it by about 35%. And we have planned that at Area 132 of Zhangguanou, the future reclamation zone, to provide a large-scale electricity reception facility. it will be able to receive about 35% of the power consumption in Hong Kong. We'll talk about carbon zero energy. We expect that by 2035 we will have sufficient facilities to import up to 60 to 70% of our power consumption in Hong Kong, and it has to be carbon zero power. Even though we are going to increase in power consumption, the carbon emission from local power plants will not grow substantially because we have plans to introduce carbon zero electricity. A large portion of that will be from nuclear energy, but we don't rule out the possibility of having renewable energy. If the prices are favorable, we don't rule out the possibility of importing different kinds of carbon zero energy, may that be nuclear or new renewable energy, into Hong Kong. Mr. Benchin. Thank you, Madam. I'm not a member of the panel, but I do care for new energy vehicles. In particular, we understand that we need our power grid to cope with more commercial EVs. But in many cases, when people want to install EV charging facilities, they're not able to get rapid response from the power companies. So I am concerned as to whether our power grid will be able to support so many e-vehicles. The PA has this target, that is to transform some of our buses and taxis to e-vehicles. But on installation of power grids, have we asked the power companies to support this measure? Given that we are going to build a big network of e-vehicles, have you considered the amount of energy or electricity we need? Will that come from nuclear energy? Do we have to increase power generation plants locally? If so, what will be the government's arrangement? Secondly, EV charging. Has the administration got plans to build bigger EV charging plants or EV charging yards for commercial vehicles? If we just rely on the filling stations, they may come in useful for emergency, but not for regular use. And the last question is, the charging fee is the same, daytime and nighttime. Have you asked whether the tariff can be lower when it's off the peak hours? Secretary. Yes, EV charging facilities. I will invite Alan to supplement. You mentioned the gradual increase in the number of EVs for a power generation. I'm sure we have sufficient supply. Even if all our cars are EVs, the power they use will only account for a small proportion of our available power. But when it comes to transformer rooms and EV charging facilities, will they have to be upgraded? Yes, that's that possibility. And both power companies have already pledged to support this change. So we don't have any worries about this. You asked whether there can be different rates for charging nighttime and daytime. Yes, this is being considered. because it is quite useful for charging of vehicles. Yes, we are studying this possibility. We don't have the detailed plan yet, but this is under consideration. What about EV charging facilities, Alan? The secretary mentioned the power grid technologies available. There can be high capacity electricity storage facilities. So at a particular spot, if the transformer room cannot support it, there can still be high capacity storage facilities to store electricity when the usage is low and for release later when there is demand. There is some subsidies available under the New Energy Transport Fund to try out this technology. And how can we ensure that we have sufficient EV charging facilities for electric buses and electric minibuses? The policy address mentioned a few things. We have got 180 PFS, petrol filling stations. The Executive Council has already approved some land lease modifications to allow operating PFS to retrofit EV charging facilities. Apart from measures mentioned in the PA, government departments are studying the possibility of retrofitting EU facilities, charging facility at GM bus stops. Thank you.
Well, it's now my time to speak. I would first like to thank the Bureau for its efforts in promoting green measures. We are indeed striving towards carbon neutrality, but of course, many of our colleagues want to expedite that. As many members said, when we went to the Bay Area, we could see that the use of electric vehicles, hydrogen energy, is much more advanced on the mainland. And in Hong Kong, we're still in this stage of conducting studies, and that we have been in that stage for many years. I think we should go full steam ahead now. If restrictions are to be relaxed, relax them. We hope to catch up for the lost time. As Mr. Chen Han-pan said, many places would want to have EV charging posts installed. They want to have quick charging or turbo charging posts. But the power companies would often say they do not have a transformer plant room, or there may be problems with the cabling. So what matters is who is going to bear the cost and the availability of land. The EV at home charging subsidy scheme, the EHSS, as well as the having charging posts installed at older shopping malls. I'm not concerned about newer residential developments. What I'm more worried about are older development projects. The Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks also took a few years to install EV charging posts, and that is due to the problem with power. So we really need to think about who is going to bear the cost and whether we have land available. If you just give power companies free rein to talk about such projects with the housing developments, we are not going to make any progress. From what I heard earlier on taxis, you said that there will be e-charging facilities, and you'll convert some petrol filling stations to green energy refuel stations. but when will they be in place? When will the vehicles be in place? I think there is a mismatch right now. We really need to close that gap. We have received requests for assistance from the EV charging facilities companies. That's why Mr. Chen Hanpan and I have arranged for meetings to be held between government departments and stakeholders. Of course, energy storage is a way of doing it, but it is not ideal and it involves a high cost as well. It may not be feasible in the end. I believe the government has set up an interdepartmental working group. Will you consider in the working group how to relax the restrictions? I think we have to resolve these very real problems. If significant investment is needed, power companies may not be willing to do so, or they will just transfer the cost to the public. The business sector is not willing to do that either due to the high cost, but you need to resolve this problem. This is a bottleneck that we have. Will the administration think about how we can resolve this problem? Apart from the shortage of EV charging facilities, in Chengquan-O, we want to construct data centers. We do not have enough power for that. How can we develop our NT? We do not have enough water or electricity. That's the problem, Secretary. I think that problem permeates many aspects, and I think the Secretary really has to think about how to resolve that issue. I also want to express my support for the strategy of hydrogen development in Hong Kong, and I know that some places are selected as trial points. If we want to develop hydrogen energy, I do understand that to be a national policy. Now, the Secretary talked about the difference between hydrogen and electric vehicles. While hydrogen is more expensive than electricity right now, from what I heard on the mainland, very soon hydrogen prices will not be far from those of electricity. And the other thing about hydrogen is that the vehicle will be fully recyclable. For electric vehicles, the lithium batteries will have to be disposed. They are not recyclable. So from what I heard, the trade thought hydrogen vehicles are more green. So I think in this strategy, we really have to think about these as well. Now, with the projects that you approve, we are not just trying to approve those that use hydrogen energy. We need to make sure the option is a more environmentally friendly one as well as a more low carbon one. From what I heard, the trade believe that the projects are not necessarily that. I did not look into the details, but I hope the administration will review your approved projects to make sure they are green and low carbon. I also hope that the Secretary will liaise with the mainland to introduce nuclear energy options to stabilize our electricity tariffs. Also, I think you can talk about whether we can have more waste-to-energy measures in place. With our second waste-to-energy facility, I believe it will take another 7 years. But in the meantime, what are we going to do with our waste? Is it going to go to landfills? Chen Yupming and I are very concerned about this. Do we need another landfill? If we can have such waste-to-energy facilities to be shared between Hong Kong and mainland cities, if they can help us deal with our waste, I believe there will not be any need for Hong Kong to have another landfill, and we can release some land in the landfill for development. I think the secretary should think about talking about that with the mainland. Well, thank you, Chair. I think you have made very good suggestions. You mentioned something about charging posts and power companies. We did talk to power companies. They did say they would try to resolve the problem about power supply. It is believed more time will be needed to complete works. We will closely monitor the situation, and as I said earlier, there is an interdepartmental working group on this. We hope to resolve these very much real problems in the working group meetings. You also asked about whether hydrogen energy is indeed a low carbon option. It depends on what type of hydrogen you are using. We have gray hydrogen as well as blue hydrogen, and most of what we're using would be gray hydrogen. But whether it is gray hydrogen or green hydrogen, for its transportation and storage, the standards are pretty much the same. So whether it is safety standards or the regulatory framework or the infrastructure for transportation and storage, when the cost of green hydrogen lowers significantly, we can make use of green hydrogen widely. So we do want to make preparations for a hydrogen economy without having in mind which hydrogen it is. We shouldn't wait until green hydrogen's cost barrier is low enough to implement such infrastructure. You also mentioned the possibility of cross-boundary landfill sharing. We actually have a plan in the pipeline. We have been liaising with mainland authorities. Once we have a concrete plan, we'll report it to LegCo members. In relation to processing capacity, if we can fix our problem with landfills as soon as possible, of course, that would be ideal. But Hong Kong is often often subject to some restrictions in the transportation of waste. So we'll liaise with mainland authorities to see if we can do something about the restrictions posed by international conventions. If we can't resolve it by sharing with the mainland, we will consider installing the third incinerating facility. But we'll definitely expedite that if that facility is to be constructed. We have 3 members who wish to ask the second round of questions. I will extend the meeting by 15 minutes and 3 minutes per member. Please be brief. Ms. Chen Yupming, please. Thank you. I support the government's initiative to enhance the wetland conservation park, especially with the provision of recreational facilities. I can see that the South Lantau Country Park has installed a BMX training park. So I believe country parks can provide better support for recreational facilities as well. So not only can we protect the environment, we can strike a balance between conservation and development of business sector. So I hope that the administration will keep an open mind and think about opening parks to the use for sports. We can perhaps have an extreme park in the wetland conservation park, especially if it generates economic revenue. The Robin's Nest Country Park to be designated will be connected to Wutong Scenic Area, and it will be located in the conservation circle in Northern Metropolis. How can we make better use of the country park to generate economic revenue? I believe that is an issue that members of the public will be concerned. Will the administration please elaborate on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chen. Can I defer to the director of AFC to talk about the use of country parks? Thank you, Ms. Chen. The improvement of our country parks in the past few years, the government has deployed substantial resources to upgrade and improve the recreational and visitors facilities in country parks. We have prepared mountain bikes training grounds and mountain bike trails. We have added lookout points and improved public toilets therein. We've added water refilling stations, etc. So we are going to conduct a consultancy to see whether glamping sites can be made available, and treetop adventures and wartime relics and sites can be turned to open-style museums as well. So we will start the consultancy study within this year. The plan is to upgrade our country parks for eco-tourism and green tourism. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chen Xiuhong. Thank you. Originally, I had 2 questions on EV vehicles. In the interest of time, I'll only ask one. Many cities tackle carbon zero vehicles like this. The license plate is green in color. On the one hand, there are economic incentives for the use of carbon zero emission vehicles. There may be tax concessions. Non-green vehicles may be banned from registration, and having green license plates is for this purpose. Some sections of road will not allow vehicles without the green license plate to go in. For instance, country parks. This will be an incentive for car owners to use carbon zero vehicles. Thank you. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chen, for your suggestion. We will consider the feasibility of this proposal. Mr. Lau Pok-fen. Thank you, Chair. For the Sanpo-Shu Wetland Conservation Park, I thank the Secretary's reply. He told us that a study will be conducted and the findings will be available next year. My question may not be directly related to the PA, but is actually relevant. You did a study on priority agriculture zones last year. I'd like to know when the results will be available. Well, it's not directly relevant to the PA, but then according to the PA, the Northern Metropolis will be planned in an industry-oriented approach. Now, when we have a planning application, whenever farmland is involved, whether it be in active farming or already fallow or deserted, There may even be signs of brownfield activities. The only response from the AFCD will be objection because it is farmland. As a result, land is being occupied, delaying the overall development of the northern metropolis. I myself like farming activities, and according to the Secretary, we should change our mindset. We should be proactive in conservation for farming. Well, even if a site is zoned agriculture, if it is surrounded by high rises and there is no chance of farming to resume there. Take the Queen's Hill, for example. Well, there is a big Queen's Hill PRH estate. There is not enough car parking spaces, and a site was identified nearby for the construction of a car park, but unfortunately, it is Zone A. So the application failed. If the government cares so much about farming, it should not have allowed the PRH development to go ahead next to an A zone. So the government should adopt this approach. This should be an industry-led approach. And secondly, I want to know when that study on priority agriculture areas will be completed so that we can release A zones for development. Thank you. As mentioned, years back, the government came to the awareness that there should be a clearer idea about the use of A land, A zone, and so there was a study on priority agriculture areas. And then the Northern Metropolis came in, and as a result, the study took longer than anticipated. The results will be available next year. And I think it would be more appropriate to discuss agriculture at the Food Safety and Environmental Hygiene panel. We should have a blueprint for sustainable development of agriculture. We should consider land planning as well. Again, we will use a new mindset. And farming and development may not always be mutually exclusive. We want to encourage farming. We should facilitate farming activities. In some cases, farming and development can go in parallel. We can promote farming development in the city. There can be different modes. But all in all, we will first complete the study on agriculture, priority agriculture zones first. Thank you very much, Secretary. You really have, you know how to think. You have some lateral thinking. I hope your team members can follow suit. All right, we have had ample discussion of this topic. AOB, no AOB, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary.